Welcome to the Common Good Podcast, where change agents in social sectors, business, community, and faith meet at the intersection of belonging, imagination, and gifts. I'm your host, Troy Bronsink from The Hive in Cincinnati, Ohio, and this is our second season where we build on the relationships of Peter Block, Walter Brueggemann, and John McKnight and their work as it's now expanded into a fellowship program, 12 weeks where fellows from around the world are combined together to work on their own experiment of imagination. We met several weeks ago in Cincinnati for the first time and are preparing now for our second time for those fellows to come together. And this season we'll be talking to a number of folks in their various contexts, the ways that they interact with this work. Today's conversation is with Rabbi Miriam Terlinchamp. Miriam has an old friendship with Peter Block as well as with Walter and John, and she's been part of the host cohort who helped call together this work of the common good.
We absolutely need promised land. We also absolutely need the courage of wilderness. But we sometimes just need the sustenance of the moment in the journey on the way to wilderness. And so I think we jump a lot from slavery to wilderness to promised land without thinking about what that walk was like. And that the fact is, if we're always in Egypt, we're also always on the walk, and we're always in the water, and we're always in promised land, and we're always in all these different facets. And who are the allies in that particular journey?
We had a fantastic conversation together, and regardless of your faith background, I think you'll find a lot of insight in the way that organizers and leaders work with communities and their narratives of scarcity and their narratives of abundance, and the ways that communities have to extend an invitation to come as you are, and yet all the things that are entailed in that work. The conversation picks up as Miriam reflects on her own history with Peter Block.
The first time I met Peter, actually, I don't remember how we connected the first time, but I've been here about 8 years in Cincinnati, and I was struggling with something in my congregation. I was new to the job, had never been to the Midwest before, and I heard that there was this Jew in town who did really good organizing work. And he said, "Sure, Miriam, I'll help you with this." And he came and he led our first part of our listening campaign, which now has been an annual event that we do 10 times a year, every year for the last 8 years. So he imprinted on me pretty early in the beginning of that relationship, and since it's flourished into a friendship and a deep connection.
When you talk about abundance and scarcity and the work of congregational transformation, how has this overall question about community and agency and that sense of abundance affect the way you think about congregational transformation?
I think the way that it affected me most was it made me rethink why I was doing any of it in the first place. When Jews become clergy, when we become rabbis, it's not a call, it's a job. We go to seminary, which is really grad school, and we take the GRE and the psych exams, and I have monumental student loans. And then I do a really good job at questioning and scholarship. But delving into the place for divine spirit or for a call or connecting to my why is something we really have to struggle for, something that's not really nurtured. So I would think of that as abundance in its own right. So doing that on an organizational level was really against my personal nature and against the institutional nature of congregation. So when I came to my congregation, we were failing by all the standard measures of scarcity. Low membership, crappy building that was falling apart. Like there was a raccoon that could get through our foundational cracks. It wasn't like, oh, it's falling. No, it was like falling apart. And they're like, it's so beautiful. And then there was no money, like no endowments. We only had enough money for about a year and a half left.
Just for context, how do Jewish congregations, how does giving work and that sort of stuff?
Sure. So the way that we usually make our money or sustain ourselves are 75% of all the money tends to come from congregational dues. So you pay an annual due, sort of like you would for any other membership organization. And when you don't pay it, you get an invoice and a reminder. You might even get a collections kind of notice. And then if you do not pay it, you get kicked out. That's the way that American Jewish congregations work for the most part.
Have you ever
had your face
yeah,
is so
I
funny.
know. I'm like, what? Have you ever had to kick somebody out?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
What's that conversation look like?
Well, the rabbi is not part of that conversation. And
okay.
If you can't hear it, I'm being very cheeky about it, that
Yeah.
there's a strong confidence with the rabbi's ability to manage budget, to fundraise these things, but when it comes to that part of the work, we were separated from it and we were protected from it. So I never knew how much anyone paid. I never knew if they didn't pay. And I was finding that it was happening a lot. And that's not just true of it wasn't like my congregation was weird and messed up. It was like, that's just what happens. And we don't see it as problematic. We cannot collect money on the Sabbath. So I always feel envious of the Christians because you can move me and then you pass a plate. And I'm like, that was interesting and meaningful. For us, it's like you move you and then 2 days later you get an email saying, hey, want to give? And you're like, no, I was moved 2 days ago.
Not interested now.
Yeah.
So how does that giving play a role then in agency with leadership in the congregation? And I'm leading to this because I know that you did a kind of a shift, but I want to create a little context.
So the way we shifted was first a shift why we mattered at all. Why are we unique? Why are we special? And what we found in the beginning is we weren't special or unique. And I was like, you guys, bad news. There's nothing interesting about us. We should just merge. Or we should change. And if we're going to change, then we need to rediscover our why. And so there was a lot of organizational change that happened in order to make the economic change. And I say that so we had to be healthy in spirit. I'm not saying that we had to all believe in the same kinds of things, but just to believe in ourselves, to know what was unique and great and weird and beautiful about us, and to get rid of the trappings that we felt were our best parts, but really were holding us down. And for us, I'd say that was our building. This building that was built 60 years before, 40,000 square feet, 6 acres, right in the central part of town. And do we need this? Because it's 80% of our budget. And if our primary source is people, we need to flip that percentage. So I tell you this part first because it had to happen this way, is we did this in this really weird way. We made a video about what life could be like. And then the whole time I had people who were sort of fighting this vision interrupt me and be like, no, you have to go fix the toilets. You can't build this. Or no, you have to get in the young millennials. Or no. And it was this wonderful engagement with these people who were fighting against it. And let's make this funny video and do it this way. And then we showed it to the congregation. 6 months later, we sold the building. And what we did was especially weird economically is I said, I want half. Half go lock in a high return thing that we cannot unlock for 7 years. I mean, protect it from ourselves, put all kinds of things on it. And the other half, I'm going to spend all of it in 5 years, every single penny. We're going to work in a deficit, and we're going to invest that in vision. And the vision is flipping that percentage from stuff to people. And
so when you said 80% was the budget, flipping it the other way, 80% of the budget was building and infrastructure, you flip it over 7 years.
Correct.
Okay.
So 2 years in, I'm happy to say, we flipped it. That the synagogue has grown anywhere from 10 to 18% every year since we made the flip, and all the money has grown by 10% every single year. So I say that because it's nice to know where you are in the scarcity stats also. Yeah. That trusting in the universe and being very intentional about how vision works and how that works, and then getting investment from people really made a difference. So this is where Peter comes back into my life. I mean, at this point, we've become friends. He's like, who is this weird little rabbi doing this stuff? And he tells me never to call myself little.
Okay.
So I have to correct myself there.
Just weird, Rabbi.
Just weird.
Yeah.
Yes, just weird. And so then it came to how we were actually making our money. So we had sold our inheritance, and we were able to flip. But still we were still measuring ourselves by scarcity terms. And what did growth look like, and how do we sort of sell that? And so with Peter's great guidance, we talked about the wilderness metaphor. I mean, it belongs to the Jewish people,
right? Yeah.
And first, and always other people too, I guess. And so I explained how I grew up, which was when I was a child, you bought your ticket for high holidays. For the holiest day of the year, you bought a ticket and you got an assigned seat. So if I paid $500, I'd get a middle seat. And if I paid $1,000, I'd get a whatever seat. Of course, like the most expensive one in the front, and no one wants the front one, so the most expensive ones become like the ones in the back.
Oh, that's
funny. And that was like totally normal. It was
Uh-huh.
totally normal to buy yourself in, to buy your spot, to buy everything part of it. And I just, and that high holidays, and the holiest day of the year, I said, we're not buying our faith anymore. We're not going to do that. And we're going to trust in generosity. And I'm still going to tell you how much it costs. I'm still going to be really transparent about that. But from now on, just give. And you're not going to get some email notice or an invoice, and I'm not going to block the door. I'm still going to do your funeral, even if you don't pay your dues. Because we used to check the roster.
Wow.
Is Troy still on my roster? Does he belong to me? Because then I'll serve him. But if he didn't pay his bill, he doesn't belong to me, and I don't serve him anymore. And it was a really different way of doing things. And so I'm sure for other faiths, this is like really obvious. But for us, it was a really different model. So a year ago, well, now a year and a half ago, we flipped.
Mm-hmm.
And, all the good things came true so far.
How do people in the congregation describe that flip? Like a couple examples, like.
I think there was a lot of fear of part of it. If we tell them they don't have to do this when they're so used to doing it, and it seems so easy. I think outside of the Jewish faith, they're like, I wish I could just send them one notice a year and they would just pay it, and they felt obligated in that way. So there's a lot of fear. If they don't have to do this, will they ever do it? Mm-hmm. And the answer is probably not. Like, they were right about that. Yeah. What we found is that everyone who's committed to paying something actually does. So we went from making some of the same money, sometimes a little bit more, but now we don't have to wonder, hey, Troy, you promised, but you're not doing it. Because before it was just a false pretense of who would pay and who would not. So this shortened the game. So like a year and a half in, I think there's still fear about what happens next and how do you build and how are you supposed to even budget for the coming year and things like that. It's really hard, especially still you can't collect anything on any holy day. But I think that they like telling their friends, really actually mean it when we say, come as you are, and you're a part of us just by walking in the door. And being able to back that up, that there's no actually hidden strings to that, has been huge, I think, just for the psyche of the congregation and for the staff.
In his book, Community, the Structure of Belonging, Peter Block writes, commitment and accountability are forever paired, for they do not exist without each other. Accountability is the willingness to care for the well-being of the whole, while commitment is the willingness to make a promise with no expectation of return. And he continues, the economist would say this smacks of altruism, and so be it. What community requires is a promise devoid of barter and not conditional on another's action. As we continue this conversation with Rabbi Miriam Terlinchamp, you'll notice the shift as we make a connection between the financial costs of living in this abundant narrative rather than in one of scarcity.
I didn't just suddenly wake up and say, this is going to work, let's do this, free the people, free the seat. Yeah. I first came up with this plan and we went through the listening campaign and people were like, no, we don't. And I had come up with a tier structure. So there was an all-you-can-eat plan, I have young children plan, I'm single, I don't want to pay for the young kid plan, all those different kinds of things. And they were like, no, just let us be generous if we feel like it, and we'll figure it out. And I was like, okay. And I came with a gamble. I had to gamble a couple of things. One was staff. So if I didn't make the money up, and they set they set a bar for how much we needed to raise. And then I was like, okay, guys, add $20,000 to that. No, add $30,000. I was like, Miriam, what are you doing? But I wanted to prove that the people would be naturally generous. Once they took away the tiers, they were so right. But they I had the idea, and then they were like, no, go farther. And then I was like, oh, I will.
There we go. The Elijah pouring water over the altar.
Yeah,
and
it did.
See it burn. Yeah,
it did. It worked.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's wild.
Yeah.
Be interesting to stay with your congregation for a second and go, how has that affected neighborliness? Who are your congregation's neighbors? Because you once were in a space, and now you're in a space that you rent. Is that the relationship to your space now?
So that was, in that I struggle with all this, because my vision versus our vision. What do I decide, they decide, and we decide? And that's a very hard tension for me to walk, and something that I've grown in. But yeah, we rented an office space, and we signed a 5-year lease. And I said, in 5 years, we'll know if any of this worked.
Yeah.
We'll know. And then if it doesn't, you'll fire me. And I gambled. I mean, I was take my pension back. You can have it back, guys, if it doesn't work. But let's just try. The worst case scenario is not that bad. The worst case scenario is a synagogue folds. There's 8 synagogues in Cincinnati. It'd be okay. And once you sort of name what the worst case was, it was much more doable. The problem, I give quotations here, is that at 2.5 years, we're maxed in the space. So the conversation's coming up faster. So the problem with abundance is damn, I got to do something now.
Yeah, you got to buy your way out of your lease to keep dreaming.
Yeah,
or
like
something
there's
of that sort.
exactly
Yeah, that's the scenario,
right, and what my dream is very different than what their dream is, and so like where's the bridge between those two dreams? So I think the neighborliness, like that's what I think is next. Something I wanted at the beginning. I really wanted to go to Roselawn, which is historically Jewish area of town that we left during White Flight, and is now a primarily African American area of town. But if you go down there, the synagogue, the houses have mezuzot. They have Jewish prayers on them that are painted over. The biggest church in the area was a JCC, a Jewish Community Center, and I want to go home. Like I think that reconciliation is only possible if we go home. But people aren't ready for that. Not yet.
It's a big leap, yeah.
Yeah, and I need a few more years to be ready for it. And so what's in between a reconciliation? Before we become fully whole, like what's the next step to wholeness? And I think that's what we're trying to figure out, like what can be collaborative? Do we just extend the lease and buy the place next to us or whatever it is? But for me, growth needs to be sort of, I think about like growing our web rather than our static space, if that makes sense. So like, how can I partner with more organizations in different parts of town rather than building a more, like a bigger obelisk in the middle of the white suburban Jewish area town? Does that make sense? So do I actually do better by partnering with multiple places where I have a presence in different places where we learn to be more neighborly in those spaces? I will say that our demographic flipped during all this change, that all of a sudden we went from about average age about 65 to an average age of 40. So that's a pretty big drop.
That's a huge one, yeah.
Yeah, so it's young, it's queer, it's diverse economically, socially, and that's created, it's also 90% interfaith, where one partner is not Jewish. That's
90% of the
90% of the new people coming in.
Yeah.
So my religious school, I have to talk about Jesus and I have to talk about Christmas, and like my child in there, like this, like the rabbi's kid is like, okay, what's going on, guys? And it's had to everything had to change. Once the money changed, everything changed, and that's harder for the older folk and awesome for the older folk at the same time. Yeah.
When you think of what we've been a part of building and watching kind of develop with Common Good with work, John's work, with Walter's work, and with Peter's work, what would you want to talk about? Like what is it that kind of resonates, or that you might even push back at a little bit from your own experience?
As a rabbi, every time that Walter speaks, I am like, yeah, more. Okay, wait, how do I live that? And he makes me look at my text really differently, because Walter is just a total poet, right? And then me, as this sort of naturally aggressive person, will like pull out my Bible, my Torah, and be like, where was that? Okay, Walter, where was that? Yeah. And it's great because he has taught me to bring that discerning eye and that comfort and joy with text into the space in that way. I wish that we talked more about the feminine spirit in all of this. I know it's cliche to have a woman say there should be more women, but the role, he talks so much about Moses, but Moses couldn't have done any of it without Pova and Shifra, like delivering all these children into it. And we talk a lot about needing a singular leader, but Miriam is the one who found the well in the water. Like, she's the one who figured out how to sustain people in the process of getting there. And we absolutely need promised land, and we also absolutely need the courage of wilderness. But we sometimes just need like the sustenance of the moment in the journey on the way to wilderness. And so I think we jump a lot from slavery to wilderness to promised land without thinking about what that walk was like. And that the fact is that, if we're always in Egypt, we're also always on the walk, and we're always in the water, and we're always in promised land, and we're always in all these different facets. And who are the allies in that particular journey?
Well, would you mind sharing a little bit of that for you? Like for you right now, what is the walk like then?
I think it's my tension between what I want things to be like and what things are, and where I actually fit in that, of how much do I enter a space and how much do I hold to myself. And if it's congregational, I think the big question for me is, does any of this mean anything? Is any of this relevant in 20 years? And I worry, even as the granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor, that maybe it's not.
Relevant for what?
Yeah, like
yeah,
for everything.
for everything.
Like,
Keep
do I
going.
need my traditional faith voice to be maintained the same way it has for the last 5,000 years?
Mm-hmm.
Do my kids still need to say and pray in the same language that my grandfather prayed when he was in Buchenwald concentration camp? Like, do those things need to stay the same
Mm-hmm.
as I'm building the next world? And I think that my particular call, if that not either or, is just to worry about the next 10 years. Like, what does it mean to be on the cusp of what's next? And to be true to that cusp and not to not dream far, but to know what I know is possible, which is the next 10 years, and that I have room to really be creative and open and risk a synagogue closing down, because it's not the last synagogue. And it's not the first one either.
Your voice of dissent in this would be to say, no, I think it's also important to go like, we're on a journey. We're discovering if the decision I make now will matter in 10 years. I can't claim that I just made the life-changing decision and I'm moving over into promised land. And how do you think that, just from your own perspective, how would you advise other people, or not advise isn't even the word, but how would you explain that to others, invite them into that?
Right. I think that my natural, I'm not a competitive spirit, but whatever it is that keeps me on my toes is that as soon as I cross one finish line, I'm like, finish line's really 10 feet ahead of me. Mm-hmm. And I keep moving what it means to succeed, what it means to accomplish, which is probably part of the scarcity thing, or maybe I should be talking about it in therapy instead of on this couch. Whatever it is, but I think that that's part of it, is like to honor the moments when you hit that finish line and then go, what's the next one, and understand that you come far and there's a lot way to go, and have that to come together. Peter, I had coffee with Peter about a year ago, and I was really struggling. And I said, I just wish I could jump I just want to know what the outside of the cliff looks like. Like, if I'm jumping from one cliff to the next, I want to know what the outline looks like. I don't need to know the whole solution. I just need to know there's an other side.
Yep.
And then I can jump. And he tells me this whole story, and at the end of it, he says, Miriam, you already jumped. You're in the middle of the air.
That's big. Don't act like you're still got to decide. You've already decided.
And like, if you keep looking around and be like, when am I jumping? You're going to fall.
Yeah.
And like, what's below you could be jagged rocks and rushing water, or in faith language, it could be God's hands, or in leadership language, it could be the next frontier. It could be everyone that's following with you. It could be all kinds of things, and we always presume that what we're going to fall into is something treacherous.
Contemporary Buddhist teacher says, the bad news is I'm falling and there's nothing to hold on to. The good news is there is no bottom. Mm-hmm. So it changes what the leap is. You're not leaping into the next security. You're leaping from the net, or the notion of security. It's what it sounds like you're saying. Yeah.
And I think that's very Walter-y of you, in that you never know what the systems of support are going to look like until you're in the wilderness. Mm-hmm. And I would say that's true for the leap too, not meaning that you should run out and quit your job right now. I think entrepreneurial work, we're taught that you're only serious if you do it all full time. And the fact is, no, you're only serious if you actually can hold down 2 jobs while you're doing your passion on the side, and it's still your passion. Yeah. And it's still giving you life. And to sort of check yourself at that. Like, is it still life-giving? Do I still love this? Is it still something I need to do? And I still need a paycheck, and like my kids still need to eat, and like Disneyland is not a far thing. I want to do these things. Yeah. And how do I live all of them without crushing myself?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, it does. So you've been around as we've been thinking who would be part of this fellowship program. We're in the middle of a 12-week program with 30 fellows that are working on different experiments. From your perspective, who's being drawn to this conversation, and what you think is kind of possible as folks that are experimenting at the edges of leaving scarcity for abundance, if you will?
So I don't think that anything is really possible without allies in your journey. I really don't. I mean, if you're going back to the metaphor of the Exodus, like, you needed some sustenance for the walk. Like, you needed it. And then we grabbed some like gold on the way too to build what was next.
That's right.
And stolen or not, owned or not, whatever it was, you need that. And I would think that as people are mid-leap, because if they already got here, that was already in them. And what we're offering them is wisdom, wisdom from different generation and a different level of people, and also these allies of people who get it. And what I mean get it is the people in this world who love being both fringe and frontier, and might see success in all the ways that scarcity sees success or sees Pharaoh sees success, but wants more than that, and understands that we can't deliver it alone. And so I hope that one of the tools that they're walking away with, except beyond these wonderful experiments of imagination, is maybe 1, 2, or 30 people who are right there with you in the right ways, and there for when you hit the hard points, and maybe some jagged rocks along the way too.
Yeah, it's perfect. That's great. Well, Miriam Terlinchamp, thanks so much.
Thank you.
This has been the Common Good Podcast, conversations at the intersection of place, belonging, and remembering. You can learn more about the work of Miriam Terlinchamp, as well as the Common Good Reader and our fellowship at commongood.cc. Stay in touch. Next week, we'll be talking with Northern Ireland's Mary Kerrigan, who is an architect, activist, and urbanist, about her own work and intersection with the common good. Common Good is a collaborative production of The Hive, a center for contemplation, art, and action, and common change, eliminating personal economic isolation. We're produced by myself, Troy Bronsink, and Joey Taylor. Music is written and produced by Jeff Gorman. And if you're tempted to think that your community is one of scarcity, sometimes you just have to look a little bit deeper to find out all the little hidden gems.
There's a raccoon that could get through our foundational cracks. Whatever it is, but